Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. So, let's kick things off with a question. Today's guest is an expert in mobile and wireless solutions, but what percentage of GDP did mobile technologies and services generate across North America in 2023? I know how important mobile is, but I'm not sure how it contributes to the overall GDP. I mean, what do you think? Let me know your guesses over on social and keep listening because I'll let you know at the end of the show. So today I'm joined by a company that is on a mission of service. Full service that has been wowing customers for nearly 20 years. And I love to hear from brands that are excited about doing things differently, kind of making a dent in the industry. And so, who's with me today? Well, it's Buckeye Mountain. Now, Buckeye Mountain provides highly specialized services and some unique products that enable owners and operators of cargo terminals to keep pace with the never ending demand for new technology in their facilities. And it's Greg Dunnell, one of the founders of Buckeye Mountain, that is joining me for the show today. Now, Greg has 25 years experience in developing and supporting supply chain technologies for the intermodal industry. And today, Greg and I are going to be talking all about Buckeye Mountain, what they do, namely acting as the stewards of technology on behalf of a who's who of a customer list that includes major ports, shipping lines, and amazingly, nearly every class one railroad. Wow. So welcome to the show, Greg.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's been fun to run into you over the years at the industry events, and it's fun to be here. So thank you for asking me.
Yes, I'm excited to have you here. We've been at events together, like you said. It's nice to have the time to talk, just the two of us here on the show, and really kind of get a better understanding about Buckeye, like what you do at Buckeye, what's the impact that it's making in the industry. And so let's really dive in. Let's get started. But I want to start talking about you because you've been in supply chain for over 25 years, and people might not realize that you've worked for some of the industry's biggest names like BNSF Railroad and Wabtec, to name just a few. So, can you give us a taste of your journey and your experiences across the supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been kind of a fun exercise as I was thinking about our interview and how things ended up where we are. And it's been one of those strange times of happenstance. And you look through the forks in the road that you made over your my hair's getting grayer every day. So I look back and I was like, it can't have, it's amazing. It can't be that long. But, oddly, it has been, even over 25 years. And so it's been a fun journey. And I've been very fortunate. I grew up working on a farm and, transportation kind of came naturally to me. And when I graduated from college, I wasn't what you would call an honor student. So, you kind
Really?
of,
I mean, I think there's only a small percentage of people who are.
you
So,
know what? I want to violently agree with you. And I was one of the majority. So after I graduated, you kind of go back on what you know. So I drove a truck a lot and
okay.
ended up working for a trucking company, an LTL trucking company. And it was one of those fun series of events where I was a truck driver, and then they said, "Hey, you got a degree, so." How about joining our management training program, right? And you can live anywhere in the United States, and you can pick one place where you don't want to go. And so I said, you know what? I'll go anywhere in the United States. I've been to Chicago one time and I really didn't enjoy it. So they were like, well, you know what? We can't get folks to go to LA. And I'm like, I would love it. Send me to California. So I go through the exercise, get a roommate, get an apartment. And the day before I was to leave, they said, hey, by the way, your paycheck's going to show up in Chicago and you can go there to meet it if you'd like. And the funny part was, and you can imagine the horror. And it was January, so and I'm from Colorado. I pack up my truck, I head to Chicago to meet my paycheck, and what seemed like the worst thing in the whole world ended up being the best thing in my life. I met my wife there, and my transportation journey began. And as things moved forward, I became the manager of a break bulk LTL facility out there, working the luxurious hours of midnight to noon. and did that for a lot of years. And I know it'll be hard for you to believe, but I ended up, trying to figure out a way to leave that position and get somewhat of a quality of life. And as weird happenstance would have it, they said, "Hey, we've got this big initiative. We need to digitize the bills of lading on a cross dock operation. How do we make this more efficient?" And I didn't know a thing about technology, but that sounded really interesting. As the discussions progressed, and I was a transport topics, avid reader, and I'm sitting there, you know what? Everybody's talking about this. This has got to be something. So thank God I was able to jump into it, and they let me actually end up leading it. And we did that, and it made a giant difference in multiple areas in this transportation LTL company.
Very cool.
Well, as good luck would have it, one of the technology companies ended up hiring me. It was a company called Telzon, who uh, most people probably don't remember them. They were way back in the day, an industrial, handheld manufacturing company. They were a predecessor to Symbol, who was Motorola, and now is Zebra. And so a long line of, the history of mobile computing, but that allowed me to understand that it wasn't, it's clearly about the technology, but it's really more about, what is the giant problem you're trying to solve, and how does that end up translating into getting the right people, the right technology, the right software, all of those fun things in place. So it taught me an enormous lesson. Living at Telzon, I ended up meeting people who were amazingly smart at a level that I didn't even know was possible, and learning about technology. And technology taught me an amazing amount. And I ended up kind of heading up the transportation vertical, because I could speak transportation, at least trucking. And, it was one of those weird series of events where this guy asked me, out of the blue, he was like, you know what? The railroad industry has starting this initiative, and this is back in the late 1900s, if you can believe that. They said, that we're starting to digitize how rail cars, as they go through rail yards, and the owners of the rail cars can be a million different people, even other railroads. And so they're regulating how they inspect them, repair them, make sure they're safe. And that was the objective, the safety of the rail cars, for the railroads as they're traveling on the rail
Wait a
line.
second. That was late 1990s?
That was, yes, it was it was like 1995
Wow.
ish, if I
Okay.
can,
Well, and
my
I also want to point out, you talk about having to drive your truck to Chicago to pick up a check. I mean, most people these days get upset if they have to go into the bank to deposit a check, let alone
exactly.
having to drive to Chicago.
Well, that's kind of funny. I mean, it was the 1900s.
That
I
is
know.
so true.
It is
So
the
you ended up helping them with that at BNSF. And then I was assume like what's sort of the tail end of that story and how we get to Buckeye. And
well,
I'll
and
I'll ask you about that in a sec.
yeah, and that's the funny part. So we ended up building the software that could manage the billing of how that is done.
Mhm.
And we ended up getting literally every railroad in North America on board with
Huh.
this software that helped manage how they bill each other. And then as a result, Wabtec became very interested in us. They acquired us. We lived with them for a little while. Then we said, you know what? I'm better on my own than working for somebody else. Big shocker. And, me and a guy named Matt Hunter, who's my business partner, we decided, hey, we're going to do a graceful, very friendly exit from Wabtec. And that became Buckeye Mountain, kind of focusing on the support, but it's kind of a three-legged stool of support, because any end user that's got a mobile device, when something goes wrong, they're not the ones who need to determine, is it software, is it wireless, is it the device itself? Just fix it.
Well,
And
and I think about sorry, I think about like 1995 to 1998, and we still had those like block cell
well, exactly,
phones, and we had the
exactly.
cell phones that were like screwed into the car.
I remember
So
them
when you're
well.
talking about wireless, like some of the people listening to this are like, it was my cell phone. Yeah, but cell phones looked a
Yeah,
lot different,
they
in those
really
days.
did.
Wireless was something completely different or wireless and mobile, something completely different to what we think about today. So you built Buckeye Mountain from scratch, and that was about 15 years ago. So give us an
Yep.
introduction into what do you do? How do you help your customers?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Buckeye Mountain was formed kind of with that three-legged stool to be a one-stop shop. So,
Mhm.
we can provide the technology, we can support the technology, we can design it, but it's the care and feeding, the life cycle care and feeding. So when something goes wrong, and not if, they can call one number and Buckeye can fix it. And that was kind of how we created the company. We started on the rail car side because that was kind of the DNA of what we knew.
Yeah.
And then as we worked with our railroads, and our role was kind of that trusted advisor. We didn't come in with a brand on our head. We just said, hey, what are the problems that need to be solved?
Right.
And very quickly, to no shock, intermodal came to the top of the list because there's so many opportunities, so many challenges. So intermodal became that strategic direction for Buckeye Mountain, and we designed our company around that ability to be that support. And as you know, there's so many challenges, so many things we can do. So the mobile side continues to grow, and I think today we're serving over 100,000 devices across North America, including Canada and Mexico.
Mhm.
And the wireless side is a big deal. Do you use Wi-Fi? Do you use cellular? Do you use a mix? I've got strong opinions about that, especially as how, the solutions we're putting in there are becoming so vital.
Right.
And, Verizon, they care about you and I and making sure our cell phones connect. They're not so concerned about if a rail yard connects.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
there needs to be a blend. And so not to over solution it, but yeah, there's some interesting ways to make sure you can have that managed wireless network. And Buckeye does a lot of that. And
Awesome.
then, the software side, we'll support our software, we support other people's software, but at the end of the day, we're beholding kind of as custodians of that technology for our customer. And we've migrated so that we support the technology, we provide the technology, but at the end of the day, as this technology is becoming more and more vital, and it used to be that the operations of, any transportation company, if things went wrong, they could always go back to paper. Well, that really doesn't exist anymore. And the technologies they're investing in, the innovations that are trying to get in there are now making it so operations are 100% dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you make sure that as that dependency grows, the care and feeding of it grows with it so that, the SLA is tied to this, when something goes down, it's not hours, it's minutes,
Yeah, it's
and
so true. It's so true. Well, and obviously, like supply chain and logistics and intermodal, that's very fast moving. I mean, if you've got a problem that you need to solve, you have to solve it right now. You can't
that's right.
necessarily let it go on for days. But who are the customers? Like you serve different markets. What businesses are you working with inside of those markets? Do you have like an ideal client?
The ideal client, that's an interesting question. And, it's really about, our history and our experience, because we feel like our role, our obligation is to share those lessons learned. And we've been down the potholes of technology for decades here of understanding, when you do mobile solutions, here's the things that go wrong. And we've been thankfully at the bulk of the railroads and other intermodal companies throughout North America, and we've helped them along the process because we don't come in with a brand on our head, we can say, hey, we're in the inner circle of their discussions saying, okay, how do we solve this problem?
Mhm.
And that problem, there's a million ways to do it, and there's a million ways to do it wrong, and there's a million ways to do it right. And thankfully, as I think everybody knows, the secret to success is failure.
Mhm.
And, we've been along that journey. And so
Mhm.
we help them share that. So the ideal customer, we grew up in the rail industry and we understand we speak railroad very well. We speak railroad intermodal very well. And thankfully, that really translates into marine, even distribution centers, because it's all, to your point, it's the supply chain. Everybody does the same thing, just in a little bit of different environment.
Yep.
But technologically, there's enormous common elements to it. So,
Yeah.
while our historical customer base is railroad, the intermodal side's growing. We're in almost every intermodal yard in North America from a
Wow.
technology support perspective,
Mhm.
whether we're doing it remotely or whether we've got boots on the ground in there being that technology support element.
Huh.
And, and I think that's, so the ideal customer is really that intermodal because we know that very well. And it could be railroad, it could be marine, it could be a port, it could be an inland port. But that's really where we're trying to focus and organize the company to really support all elements of the technology that is going into the innovation of the intermodal yard.
And now that you sort of gave me this overview, I'm a bit of a connector. So I'm thinking about all these people that I could potentially connect you with, which we'll talk about after we finish with the show. But
Right.
that was a really great rundown. And I love to ask that question, right? Because we want to make sure that who you're reaching out to, and if somebody's listening to this and wants to reach out to you, that they're the right fit, right? Because it benefits
Yeah.
both sides. So, talk to us about challenges like infrastructure, sustainability, staffing, rising costs, congestion. I mean, we're full of disruptions. We kind of
Right.
always have been, but we're full of disruptions right now. It's tough right now. What are the biggest challenges from your perspective faced by landside logistics facilities at the moment right now?
That's an interesting one because you and I could talk for probably 3 hours on just that. Because there's a laundry list, right? And I think if I were to whittle it down into kind of the big three that we're focused on. So the big three are, the visibility. Where's my stuff? And the last few years have been a huge, huge problem, a huge visibility of where's my stuff. And the where's my stuff also relates to the productivity and lowering the cost of operations, improving the velocity within these yards. And that's kind of the big second. And then the other one's the big infrastructure challenges. And the infrastructure is all of the basics of power, network, and then, oh, by the way, resources, the labor, right? And
Yeah.
that's a huge problem. And oh, by the way, and I know it well because, I started midnight to noon on the dock operation in the middle of Chicago. And that's not unlike outdoor rail or outdoor marine port facilities. That's a tough place to live.
It really is.
And these folks have to do their job 24/7 in all weather conditions. And it's a big deal. And, shockingly, some folks just don't like it. you know?
Well, I was talking to somebody else a little bit earlier that it takes a certain kind of person to work in supply chain and logistics, but we were really we were coming at it from, a desk job perspective and the fact that you're having to problem solve and deal with upset clients and like things like that. But
Right.
when you talk about people being in the elements, right? Those frontline workers for supply chain that are in the elements that are working the midnight shifts because supply chain really does make the world go round
It really
and it
does.
has to work and move 24/7. We don't talk necessarily about those jobs and those
Right.
frontline workers. And I'm glad that you brought that up because that is a challenge. And you have to
Oh,
be a
yeah.
certain type of person to maybe be in logistics and do a desk job or
Right.
get in the elements and do that midnight to noon job.
Well, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but these folks, they're to live in that environment is a big deal. It's a hard deal. And now, with all of the innovation, all the technology we're putting on the supply chain, intermodal specifically,
Yeah.
now they're not only driving around these yards, moving goods from one place to another. Now we're asking them, oh, use all this technology so we can improve your productivity. So we can have the visibility to what's going on or what's not going on. And oh, by the way, in the middle of a snowstorm or, in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, oh, by the infrastructure like power, network may or may not exist. And now we're asking the same thing to these folks. And it's a big, big problem.
Yeah.
And when you talk about those problems of visibility, now we're putting lots of machine intelligence, artificial intelligence. I like to refer to it as machine because it's really artificial and it's that's not a thing. It's a machine intelligence. It's teaching software to make all of these amazing decisions to help us be smarter at what we do.
True.
And the visibility side of it, how we do that inside of an intermodal yard, by putting cameras and automated gate systems and in-yard ability to manage where things are put, where things need to go. And that's a giant deal. And then the operational visibility of what am I doing right and where and what am I not? You can't
Yeah.
manage what you can't measure, the old axiom, right?
Yeah.
And
It's so
so the
true.
visibility side, it's easy to say, where's my stuff? But the formula for figuring that out is giantly complicated.
Mhm.
And the amount of investment that these companies are putting in, these intermodal companies is massive.
Yeah,
And
which
yeah,
causes overwhelm and pressure
Amazing.
for those folks to understand how to use it and to use it and in different environments. And sometimes I think we don't necessarily put it into perspective as to the environment that the supply chain professionals, frontline workers are working in that need to utilize this technology or even give them the grace of how long it's going to take them to really put it into practice and put it into um,
Exactly right.
their day to day, right?
Yeah,
And
the
so,
training, yeah, and when things go down, can you imagine the frustration? I'm
mhm,
not paid to be a technology troubleshooter. I'm paid
that's
to
true.
actually operate.
That's
And so
true.
that's the big migration, and that's the role
Yeah.
Buckeye's playing is working hand in hand with those operating folks to say, okay, we're there for you. You do what you do well, Buckeye will do what we do well, and we work really closely together. So a lot of boots on the ground.
So let's talk about that because your aim is to help customers solve their hardest problems both remotely and out in the field. And that's what we're talking about right now. One way that you're doing that is with your tech ops teams, who you say think like operators, but act like tech experts. And I kind of love this because everybody needs a tech expert in their pocket, I believe, these days. And so, what do you mean by that? Like, how are you utilizing that expertise to tackle some of the challenges that we've just talked about?
Well, it's interesting. And as we've kind of grown up and this has matured over the years, as we have been in the front lines of the frustration of these operators. And, we're paid to operate, not support the technology. And so we've kind of begun okay, well, we've had a really good intelligent help desk that remotely helps, but that doesn't really solve things as quickly as needed because the guy operating that crane, he didn't want to talk to somebody on the phone and he's not paid to. So it's migrated into boots on the ground, technology folks who can live in that environment. Well, now that that investment has grown, the lines have blurred between technology and operations because it's really kind of one. And so our vision, our notion is it is, and we've kind of coined it as TechOps. So now we have begun taking on these intermodal facilities as the custodians of technology, but as operators.
Mhm.
So it is folks who are operators with a giant technology focus. So we spend a lot of time making sure that those folks that can operate and be in that environment, now we train them to also have a great technology awareness, an understanding of, okay, not only how the pieces parts work, but why. And the
Right.
why is probably the biggest part, right? Because it's not that it's the guy looking over your shoulder making sure you're doing your job.
Mhm.
It's truly understanding that this lends itself to the visibility of the supply chain so that when, Joe customer calls and says, "Where's my TV?" We can say, "Oh, by the way, it's right here." And so
Yeah.
the tech ops is really that hand in hand collaboration with the technology at the gates, in the yard, at the crane, on the vessel, on the rail line,
Mhm.
and actually being the folks operating that facility. So we're the ones driving the cranes. We're the folks being that, but as a technology custodian.
So, and we're going to get to that in just a minute, but you talk about how important the why and the operators understanding the why. So instead of us just, here, use
Right.
this technology, here's some training, you have to do it, you have no choice, here you go. I think you're onto something there, right? I think the operator understanding the why behind using that technology, what it's going to
Yeah,
do for them on their day to day. But I think even more to that is the impact.
that's right.
People need to understand that the impact that they're currently making in their role as it stands today without necessarily the introduction of technology. They go to work, they're motivated to go to work, they understand the impact that they make without that. What does that look like as far as their motivation and their impact once the technology has been put into place? Does it change the impact that they make? Does it mean that they're going to be able to make more of an impact because they can do maybe more in a shorter period of time? Like, what I think that is also a missing piece to that puzzle in getting everybody's buy-in and getting that technology into their hands faster and adopted a little bit quicker. Um, Talking about that steward of technology role that you just mentioned, can you give us an example of how this tech ops offering helps customers? Like, don't customers kind of do this themselves, or what does that look like?
Well, that's a great point. And in growing up in this industry, the
Mhm.
railroads and, as our historical customer, they did, and they had to, because as they adopted this technology, it's very unique, and the way they had to implement it is unique. And so they did. They had to, while their core competency is, hooking and pulling.
Uh-huh.
But to do that, there's a lot of technology involved. So they had to bulk up and do a lot of technology support. Well, it kind of goes back to the whole, core competency thing. So you're right. We had to, our biggest competition was our customers themselves.
Right.
And that's a good news, bad news scenario. So when we introduced a lot of these ideas and notions, it was about, okay, well, yeah, you got to be a lot cheaper and you got to be a lot more effective. Well, it really wasn't about that. It was also the utilization and helping them truly receive those benefits and those returns that those giant investments in technology were supposed to be resulting in. And so over the years, it was a matter of breaking down some of those walls. But you're right. We had to prove that we could do, from a core competency standpoint, building their trust, behaving in their best interest. And you had to demonstrate that. You couldn't just say it. And then over time, and that's why I've been doing this for decades. It took a long
And the
time
gray hair. I mean,
and the gray hair, but you had to do what you said you were going to do. And you all in the trust, and everybody said it, it takes years and years and years to gain trust. It takes minutes to lose it. And so, that's the thing that, I stand up on my soapbox, every day within the inside walls of Buckeye saying, guys, it doesn't matter. Your customer, your paycheck doesn't come from Buckeye. It comes from the customer.
that's true.
And if you're not doing behaving in their best interest and doing, not in Buckeyes, in theirs, everything else will work itself out. And we're a product of that. And thank God we've grown every year. The trust has grown every year. And so this initiative of TechOps, it was a different one that they could say, okay, well, why do you think you could do that? You've
Right.
never operated. You're pretty good at the technology. But we made the investment in in saying, okay, well, because there's a blurred line and, you know, kids coming up these days, they can do technology better than anybody. So
Right.
technology isn't new, it's just part of our life.
Yeah.
And
It's so
so
true. Mhm.
and that's the same thing in these yards. And you can trust these folks, even the folks that have been there for decades and decades. And there's a few of those folks, they're getting it. So the benefits aren't a matter of, someone looking over your shoulder. To
Yeah.
your point, it was very well received as long as you trained well and understand you guys have a real impact. And here's the impact. And letting them see that on a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis, via okay, here's what we did today. And it's not about moving this container from A to B, it's the product of what you guys have done as a whole. And look what happened to the velocity of this yard. And oh, by the way, now let's throw some competition into it. Here's what the otd yards are doing. You guys could do it, so and on and on and on. But, I think it's been extraordinarily well received. It
Mhm.
was a tough one to sell because it took an enormous amount of trust
Yeah.
on the part of our customers because it was a new concept. And we've begun it. We've got 3 or 4 yards under our belt already. We're seeing the benefits. We're having to demonstrate it very clearly, but it's
Mhm.
going really well.
So I love to hear that. And I have a bit of a better understanding of the services that you provide. I think one of the technologies or the products that you have under your technology is rapid deploy. Now, when I hear rapid deploy, I kind of think about onboarding. What does that mean? How does that play in all of this? If it is around onboarding, I know a lot of people, that's a big question for them.
Well, it's interesting. It's a play on words for sure. It is, and and it talks to some of the hard problems that exist really only in this type of an environment. And rapid deploy came about, talk about a long story to a short question, but it's kind of a cool story. So many, many years ago, when that hurricane hit Houston,
Mm.
Kansas City Southern had been a longtime customer of ours, and we were collaborating on lots of different things. And the demonstration of a true partnership is when they encourage and allow you to fail.
Mhm.
And we come up with a lot of harebrained ideas. Well, we came up with a harebrained idea when they hit their Houston intermodal facility, wiped out their infrastructure. And they
Wow.
were talking 6 months, over $500,000 just to replace like the Wi-Fi.
Mhm.
We were like, you know what? We kind of came up with this harebrained idea of, what if we came up with a system that didn't need power,
Mm.
didn't need a network connection, and we could get this thing in days, not months.
Mhm.
And oh, by the way, it'll be about half as much. And they were like, well, if you're dumb enough to say it, we'll be smart enough to take you up on it. And so we created this, and we've got this amazing man who is our wireless kind of inventor. And he came up with a way to create and it was initially those 20-foot intermodal boxes
Mhm.
that, kind of you could find everywhere. And we were going to wrap them in solar panels, put all of the smarts inside them, and then hang a mast up there. And that was, the antenna.
Mhm.
But it took up a little bit too much space. So it kind of came down to a 5-foot stainless steel box
Mhm.
with all the solar panels, all the batteries, all the communications equipment, put it out there. And we literally did it in, less than 2 days. We deployed the whole yard. And
Wow.
that's been running for over 8 years. And we grew from there, did the rest of the Kansas City Southern intermodal network. And then we've done many other class one, many other intermodal facilities. And our rapid deploy family has grown. So that was the rapid one. Now we've got a couple of others, but it kind of talks to the vital nature of these innovations that are going in
Yeah.
are highly dependent on, they can do everything, but if they can't communicate, that's a big deal. So Rapid Deploy was a product of getting a managed wireless network that we could guarantee connectivity. And we did it so emphatically that we guarantee it as a service.
Wow.
So if it doesn't work, they don't pay. And thank God, knock on wood, we've been doing this for 8, 10 years and
You haven't had one that hasn't paid.
haven't missed a paycheck. And the innovations continue to grow. And the idea of this autonomous, because even inside of an existing modern
Mhm.
intermodal yard, the cost of pulling power and network is gigantic, not to mention the disruption of the operations.
So let's talk about that because you've just given us a really great sort of case study and example of what you've done with rapid deploy. But I'm pretty sure you have another one either in a yard or whatever that looks like that you've deployed your technology. They've seen an ROI, a benefit, an impact to the industry. Can you give us another example that sort of covers all of that for us so that we can, get an even better understanding?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. So, and this one talks to the most crudest of natures and the expansion, the rapid expansion of kind of inland ports, getting the freight off. And there's a lot of these facilities that are coming up in the middle of nowhere. And this one just so happens to be in the middle of eastern Colorado, and it's literally in the middle of a field. And it's an intermodal facility, and they're doing a lot of stacking of containers, moving, and everything that an intermodal facility would need.
Mhm.
Well, the big problem is there's no power and there's no network. But yet we have to operate it as a modern intermodal facility.
Right.
And so all of these technologies that we're moving forward with um, are 100% solar based. And we're doing the modern automated gate. We're
Mm.
doing all of the Wi-Fi inside of that yard to make sure we can help support the visibility of the cranes, of the hostlers driving around.
Mhm.
And it's an interesting case study of understanding, okay, in the crudest of natures and in the worst of environments,
Right.
how do you deploy a technology cost effectively,
Mhm.
incredibly stable, because again, the cost of down is, thousands a minute. And this is a railroad intermodal facility in the middle of nowhere, eastern Colorado.
Mhm.
And oh, by the way, it snows,
Yeah,
it rains,
you
it
love
does,
snow. It's
it
one of the
does all
reasons why I'll only go to Colorado in June.
I
Just
don't
kidding.
blame you. I don't blame you. But yeah, so that one's a great case study of
But
what we
also, and I just want to point out, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think also from a sustainability standpoint as well. I mean, if you're
exactly.
using solar panels, solar power to be up and running very quickly, I mean, the sustainability impact alone, to sustainability goals within that client of yours, but then also the impact to the industry is huge.
That's right. Yeah, and we've had lots of comments from Norfolk Southern, BNSF, these customers who have deployed this technology. You're right, and they do get credits for it, and it's a big deal. We did it because it had to be done, but you're right, the sustainability impact of it is real, and the bulk of all of those rapid deploy nodes that we are supporting entire yards are 100% solar. Yeah, and
Amazing.
it's a pretty cool, and it does it for the right reason, but it does it also for it addresses a real need.
Right. Now, I can't believe we're at the end of this. I've got one more question for you, and it's kind of around the future, right? We've talked about the past and how we've gotten here. We've talked about the present and what you've been able to do for your clients and how you continue to do that. But now I want to sort of think about future and vision. So, Buckeye Mountain believes that the landside logistics facilities of tomorrow will operate quite differently than they do today, right? So, what's your ultimate vision for that? What will they look like? What can we expect from Buckeye Mountain in the coming year? Or, as you work towards making that vision a reality?
Yeah, and I think it's about, the innovations in the intermodal yards to create visibility, to optimize operations, to do all of those. We know, and it's been demonstrated by the investment, it's going to continue to grow. I do believe this TechOps, the operators have to be the custodians of the technology to really get the utilization and drive additional innovation because we're only at the tip of the iceberg on how all of this is going to impact everything else. And so I love the idea of the folks being the operators, also being the technology folks, not only from a support, but from an innovation perspective.
Yeah.
And I think we're right at the beginning of that. So we're going to continue to invest in that. We're seeing the real benefits and we're demonstrating it to our existing clients today. We're doing it and it's working. So we're going to continue to do that. And I think, that is going to speed the innovation, it's going to speed the support, and it's going to drive additional returns so that they can actually see, the tangible returns so that they can reinvest and grow it even more. So I think we're gonna see a lot more of that. I think the rapid deploy side of it is really demonstrating some unique ways of cost effectively guaranteeing the connectivity, driving optimization, driving the ability to do things remotely. Because if we can pull things into an easy workplace environment and still provide the benefits operationally,
Right.
that's a no-brainer. But you need the
Absolutely.
infrastructure to do it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I can't wait to see what happens. But from aging infrastructure to financial constraints, labor issues to increasing environmental regulations, intermodal terminals and landside logistics facilities are facing big challenges. Many years in the making. But Buckeye Mountain wants to change all of that. They're on a mission to bring outstanding customer service back in fashion in some of the most demanding environments in the industry, acting as they say, stewards of technology and standing side by side with their customers to solve big problems. Well, did you have a guess at today's big question? Well, at the top of the show, I asked you what percentage of GDP did mobile technologies and services generate across North America in 2023? Well, it was 4.5%. So to put that into perspective, that's a contribution totaling $1.3 trillion. So the economic value of the mobile sector is not to be underestimated. If you want to find out more about Buckeye, you can head over to buckeyemountain.com. A massive thanks to Greg for joining me today and to the team at Buckeye Mountain for making this episode happen. And if you want to hear more from us, you can head over at letstalksupplychain.com to check out all of our content. Plus, we will be back next week with some of the best and brightest in the industry. Greg, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.